When introducing Persona and Shin Megami Tensei to the newcomer, the first few words you'll often hear are, "It's like Pokémon, but..." While some people may find the comparison overdone and cliché, it's not an unfair comparison to make. They both have monster collecting aspects, they both focus their battle mechanics around weakness exploitation, among other things. It's a nice shorthand way to illustrate the general idea in the most universally understandable way. After all, Pokémon is the most recognizable and profitable franchise in existence. I swear I'm not lying. But in this video, I want to really look at this comparison beneath the surface level, because I like both of these franchises, and I love hyper-analyzing gameplay and themes. I guess we might as well start off with the most obvious talking point: the monster collecting. The acquisition methods are different across Pokémon, Persona, and SMT, but the goal is still the same. Recruit enemies you encounter out in the wild and have them fight for you on your team. Funnily enough, Pokémon's recruitment method is the most violent one. You have to damage the Pokémon to weaken it and increase your catch rate success. Pokémon will simply attack you until you wipe, or in some cases, run away or use a move that will instantly end the battle. In both SMT and 3 of the 5 mainline Persona games, you just talk things out peacefully. Or at least you try to. Demons can ask for a number of different things in return, such as money, items, or even your HP and MP. Against stronger Pokemon, you could argue the cost of catching those is effectively the same, since they will be wailing on you as you throw Pokeballs at them, which can lead you to consuming more of your healing items to sustain yourself. But resource management can be easier or harder depending on the specific Megaten game you're playing. In the Persona games, it's just kinda all over the place. Okay, let's start with Persona 1. Demons have 4 different moods. They each do different things, but for the scope of this video, the only one we care about is eager. When the demon is eager, they don't join you per se. Rather, they give you their Persona card. While you can't actually use it to summon said demon, you can fuse it with other Persona cards acquired from other demons to create actual Personas to use. The problem is that every character has 4 contact options, and unless you're looking at a guide, you're not gonna know which one is the correct one. In my first playthrough of Persona 1, I was only able to figure out what worked for 2 or 3 personality types, out of the many combinations that demons can have in that game. On top of that, the game has optional party members, which means there's a small chance you won't even have the character you need for certain demons. And on top of that, depending on the moon phase, the demon might just get pissed off even if you pick the option that's supposed to work. Persona 2 uses a similar character-based contact system. The moon phase factor is completely removed, but instead of Persona cards, you get tarot cards that you exchange for a selection of Personas in the Velvet Room. It is not an equivalent exchange by any stretch of the imagination. Every Persona takes like 10 times the amount of cards their demon counterpart will give you, so imagine needing to capture 10 of a single Pokemon species before you can actually use them. It's as lame as it sounds, so we'll leave it at that. Persona 3 and 4 would drop demon negotiation, as none of the enemies you fight are actually recruitable Personas. They're just enemies. After battle though, you have a chance of getting shuffle time, where you're given a chance to get a Persona, among other rewards. The actual rules and gimmicks of shuffle time aren't really all that relevant for this discussion, so we'll just move on. Persona 5 would see the return of enemy negotiations, as well as enemies that actually become Personas. It's greatly simplified compared to the older games. You answer 3 questions correctly and you get the new Persona. After a certain point, the game will straight up tell you which answer is the best, and you can straight up bully the enemies for their money and items. I like this more than Persona 1 and 2, but I feel like modern SMT strikes a much better balance of push and pull between you and the demon. Something universal across all Megaten though, is the Compendium, where every demon or Persona you've ever acquired gets registered, and you can read a blurb about their lore. This is actually a pretty important feature in Pokemon too. They put it at the top of your pause menu, so the actual collecting aspect is a lot more important to Pokemon's identity than it is to Megaten's. However, Megaten does reward you for reaching certain completion thresholds for the compendium, just like Pokemon does. If you constantly update your compendium entries, resummoning a demon or persona is essentially the same as depositing and withdrawing Pokemon from PC storage. Except the compendium costs money. Wait. So, in Pokemon I get free data storage, but in Megaten I have to pay just for a page in a book? Both franchises have their weird conditions for actually collecting all of their monsters. For Megaten, you have stuff like special fusion requirements, and certain fusions that are locked behind completion of quests or social links, in the case of Persona. However, Pokemon's got stuff like version exclusives, and species that only evolve through trading between games. Pretty much all Persona games make it possible to complete the compendium within just the one copy of the game, even if you have to cycle through again on New Game Plus. SMT will sometimes lock certain demons behind going for the Law or Chaos route, but just like Persona, there's New Game Plus, which makes it possible to carry those over to another playthrough. So I suppose you could eventually reach a 100% compendium. And lastly, there's the big elephant in the room. Demi-kids, or devil children in Japan. So of course, during the huge Pokemon craze in the 90s and 2000s, lots of other franchises tried getting in on that same market. Technically speaking, Megami Tensei already predates Pokemon in terms of the monster collector genre as a whole, but doesn't really fit into all the archetypes established by Pokemon that we associate with the genre today. And so Atlus created another splinter series of Megaten that would try to make itself more adjacent to Pokemon in the Devil Children series. But honestly, these games kinda deserve a video of their own, so we'll just leave it at that and continue to focus on comparing the two mainline series to Pokemon. Battle mechanics are another huge point of commonality that people will gravitate to, and it's very easy to understand why. For the later games, that is. The classic SMT and Persona games followed the same principle of other RPGs at the time. Weaknesses and resistances were there, but they weren't a central component to the combat back then. It would only be upon jumping into the PS2 era where Atlus would really start pushing its modern design philosophy for its turn-based combat. So in Pokemon, what are the basics we're taught? Fire beats ice, electric beats wind. Well, Persona's like that too. Now, imagine that, but you got to hit them again, and again, and again. Obviously, enemy HP is more inflated in Megaten to compensate for that, but they both build off the same founding principle: weakness exploitation. While this is something that exists in other RPGs too, it's not as central to the battle mechanics of those games as it is in Pokemon and Megaten. Weaknesses in classic Final Fantasy are honestly more of an advanced mechanic for players who really know the game well. Like, I swear, only people like me pay attention to this stuff, like flying enemies being weak to throw-type weapons, like spears and boomerangs. Yeah, I bet half of you didn't even know that there was a throw element in Final Fantasy IV. Starting from Shin Megami Tensei 3 Nocturne, the series would start building off the idea of hitting weak points with the press turn mechanic. So imagine the idea I just presented to you before. Discovering the enemy's weaknesses was simply rewarding the astute player for exploring all their options. In these games, it's the entire goal of the combat. Turns are represented by these turn icons, and hitting the enemy with an attack they're weak to will only consume half a turn icon, basically letting you double dip. The next action will always consume that half turn icon, unless you can continually exploit weaknesses, converting more of your turn icons into half turns. With smart enough play, you can potentially double your number of actions. However, if the enemy blocks or dodges your attack, you consume 2 whole icons, If the enemy absorbs or repels your attack, you lose all your turn icons. You're not necessarily rewarded for exploring all your options, you're just kind of expected to find weaknesses where you can and hope that you don't accidentally hit an immunity. Or, just get really unlucky. The same rules apply to both the player and the enemy, so stacking up your own resistances to their attacks can help eat up their turns. In a turn-based game, every turn counts. Despite their differences in approach, they both work off this same principle. There's a reason Pokemon gives you a setting to be able to switch Pokemon the same time the opponent swaps out, and another setting where switching will always take up a turn no matter what. SMT has been sticking to the press turn battle mechanic since 2003, and it was so effective that other Megami Tensei games, including Persona, would put their own spin on this idea. Starting from Persona 3, we'd be introduced to the one more mechanic. In a similar fashion to SMT, you exploit weaknesses to earn more actions in battle. Instead of sharing a turn count across your entire party, turns are just on a character-by-character basis. They're just turns. When a character hits a weakness, the target gets knocked down. This creates an opening for you to get one more attack in. You can't get one more off the same enemy twice, so the goal of this mechanic is a larger focus on chain hitting as many enemy weaknesses as you can across the entire enemy group. Knocking down all the enemies lets you do an all-out attack on the opposing party. All the rules I just mentioned, except all-out attacks, apply to the enemy party too. The most common phrasing I see is calling these combat mechanics Pokemon but more complex. Look, I know some of the more well-versed JRPG fans think they're too deep and nuanced for Pokemon, but I do want to give it some credit where it's due. I'd say the real difference between Megaten and Pokemon combat is barrier to entry versus skill ceiling. I think we can all agree that the barrier to entry for Persona is thicker than Pokemon, and SMT's barrier is even more demanding. Megaten's upfront rule set has more rewards and punishments. Press turn and one more definitely have more tangible layers to them. But once you understand these mechanics, I'm gonna be real with you, there's not really much of a skill ceiling beyond that. Optimizing demons becomes second nature to you over time, and optimizing personas is even easier. Like, it's so insanely easy, and it's only gotten easier over time. For one, you can boost your stats to max. You have so much more flexible customization and skill selection thanks to skill inheritance and fusion, and skill cards. I already made a video explaining my beef with that mechanic, so I won't repeat myself here. Now, that's not to say Megaten is easier than Pokemon, most of the time. Atlas games are intrinsically more difficult and without a doubt offer more challenges to the player. But what you see is what you get. Once enough time passes, someone finds the cheese strat for every super boss, the statistically irrefutably most optimized demon or persona builds are discovered. Pokemon's not really like that. While the main bulk of content in Pokemon games tends to lean more on the easy side, there's actually a lot of hidden depth within its mechanics. You can't fully max out stats, but you can maximize growth potential for certain stats. You have factors like a Pokemon's nature that will increase the growth of one stat while decreasing another, and while Pokemon, much like demons and personas, naturally favor certain stats over others, you also have these things called inherent values and effort values. Inherent values are a random set of numbers applied to a Pokemon's stats upon generation. Effort values are gained through experience and based on the opponents you defeat. You can push the growth potential of a stat that a Pokemon already excels in, or another stat that could use just a little bit more of it to work better with its available moveset. Pokemon are also limited to just 4 move slots, as opposed to the 8 you're given for demons and personas. While it's more limited, this actually opens up multiple ways to spec a Pokemon that are equally valid. Pokemon moves also tend to be better balanced than skills in SMT and especially Persona. More power in Pokemon often comes at the cost of accuracy, or recoil damage, or a debuff to yourself. Some moves have less power, but a really useful secondary effect. Not that SMT or Persona don't have these types of caveats, just that more often than not, it's just better to go all in with power. Or they end up stacking power with insanely good effects on top of them. Move customization is also more limited in Pokemon. Unlike most Mega 10 games, you can't just teach any skill to a Pokemon. While there are items that can teach moves, only certain Pokemon can learn them. Some moves can only be given to a Pokemon by breeding it onto them through another Pokemon. And that's a whole other rabbit hole on its own. You see, it takes more advanced mechanics to really get the level of customization modern Mega 10 games give you. Now, normally these mechanics aren't super important outside of competitive metagames, which I have no interest in. But nonetheless, they're still present in the game no matter what, and can still be taken advantage of in a single-player experience, primarily in the game's post-game challenges. These have come in many shapes and forms over the years. These things also add a layer of personality to every Pokemon. No two Pokemon, even of the same species, will be completely identical. The foundation is more rudimentary, but the limitations are what allow a higher skill ceiling. Competitive Persona would be super boring because everyone would just be running around with the exact same Siegfried build. And then, there's friendship. Friendship plays a bigger role in Persona than it does in Pokemon. Now, obviously Persona is a friendship simulator, so it might not sound that weird to you at first. But to anyone who grew up watching the Pokemon anime, friendship gets the characters through a lot of tough shit. That and Pokemon is often perceived as the more wholesome brand between the two. By progressing social links, you can gain bigger XP bonuses upon fusion, and maxing out a social link unlocks the highest level persona of that social link's arcana. Later games would compound this with even more benefits, such as party members being able to endure a hit, party members taking a hit for you, recovering from ailments, free buffs to your stats, and many more. Pokemon also has a friendship stat. This was well before it even became a central mechanic in Persona. This mechanic would only affect a few very specific things for most of the series, actually. There are 2 attacks in this game that scale their power off that Pokemon's friendship stat. Return becomes stronger the higher your friendship is, and then there's Frustration, which gets stronger the lower your friendship is. Some Pokemon can only evolve when their friendship is extremely high. Without getting into too much of the technical jargon, friendship just kinda increases passively over time from leveling up and walking. Friendship decreases when your Pokemon gets knocked out, or when you give it cheap healing items that are basically like taking bitter medicine to them. There's way more I could get into mechanically, but that would honestly require its own video, which someone else has probably made already. So you might be thinking, wow, that sounds nothing like friendship in Persona. Persona friendship is about spending time with people doing friendship-coded things, right? Pokemon friendship is more about bonding over the journey itself and the enjoyment of battling as a sport. Except, there is a mechanic just ever so slightly more adjacent to social link ranks. The 3DS Pokemon games would introduce a new mechanic called Affection. I swear this is a totally different stat than friendship in these games. It's a lot easier to wrap your head around too. You go into this pet sim mode where you bond with your Pokemon the way you think you would, by doing pet things with them, like feeding them treats and petting them. Interesting how it took them until 2013 to actually implement something like this into their games, but better late than never. And I swear, this mechanic is proof that any Pokemon can be cute if they try hard enough. But the part that's actually similar to Persona is how their affection stat is measured. You increase their affection points, and after reaching a certain amount, their affection will go up by 1 heart on a scale of 5. which is basically ranking up your bond with them. And ranking up affection will earn that Pokemon certain perks in battle. This includes XP gains, surviving a fatal attack, recovering from a status ailment. Wait a minute, that sounds kind of familiar. Yeah, ironically enough, a lot of the benefits from maxing out affection are similar to a good amount of the social link perks of the later Persona games, like Persona 4 Golden, Persona 5, and Persona 5 Royal. And yes, they do trivialize the combat just as much as it does in those games. But hey, unlike with social links, the affection stat is not a central mechanic of the game, and it's a lot easier to ignore. Until it wasn't. Starting in Pokemon Sword and Shield, they would merge the friendship and affection mechanic, presumably because they were kinda redundant. But remember how earlier I said friendship in Pokemon already kinda just goes up naturally over the course of the game? Yeah, now all those overpowered benefits are basically inevitable. In that regard, it does kinda become like social link perks, because at that point, avoiding them is just playing the opposite way the game is intended. As you can imagine, this is a controversial problem among fans of both franchises. Do you want to know something else? Shin Megami Tensei is getting in on it too. Not nearly to the extent of Pokemon or Persona, but SMT5 Vengeance has added some sentimental elements to the game that might allow the player to keep their favorite demons around instead of fusing them away. On occasion, you can talk to the demons in your stock at this place called the Demon Haunt, which can be accessed at the ley line found. They can gain stat points, give you random items, and some demons even grant special side quests. The benefits of fusing demons are still there, but it is possible to keep demons viable past the point in the game their usefulness would expire, for lack of a better term. I actually think Pokemon could sort of benefit from this for earlier game Pokemon that fall off after a certain point, but I'd rather not get into speculative fantasies in this video. Finally, we have the simplest comparison, so simple that it might have gone under some of your noses. Color. The very first Pokemon games are themed after colors. While other games down the line would also follow suit, I want to primarily focus on the first generation games, as those are the most relevant to this point. The reason being that these games in particular are where the colors are most prominent in the visuals here, much like the UI elements in Persona games. So we're all familiar with the modern Persona trifecta. Persona 3's blue, Persona 3 Portable's pink, Persona 4's yellow, and Persona 5's red. These colors primarily take up the game's title screens and menus. These colors, no doubt, are one of the biggest factors of their identity from a visual standpoint. Persona 1 and 2 would eventually have colors retroactively associated with them. Don't act like it didn't work. Persona 1 is purple to you now. You can't unsee it. Persona 2 would, at first, use red for Innocent Sin and gray for Eternal Punishment. But in 25th anniversary artwork, they end up using orange to represent both. If you play these games on the normal DMG screen colors or the Super Game Boy colors, you probably have no idea what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the Game Boy Color and Game Boy Advance palettes. On these systems, the color of said version is the main color, accented by a darker shade of it, and a completely different color that's able to stand out on top of those for NPCs, Pokeballs, and battle animations. While not having dynamic colors for each area sounds like a downgrade, it honestly does a lot to make these three variants of basically the same game feel a bit more distinct from each other. And, you know, color theory and all that means that the color you spent looking at for most of the game might subconsciously invoke a different mood or tone in your head throughout the journey. Take what you felt about Persona 5's Red and apply it to Pokemon Red. You're in for an adventure full of tough obstacles, but huge triumphs are surely to follow. Now take Persona 3's Blue and apply it to Pokemon Blue. A relaxing and cozy experience. Wrap yourself in a blanket and let yourself get invested in the grind and the gameplay loop. Pokemon Yellow is actually way more colorful than either red or blue version. But so is Persona 4. And look! a little mascot who follows you around. He's so cheerful and bright, just like this game. And finally, there's Pokemon Green. Wait, you mean to tell me that Pokemon fans have had multiple Green games, and Persona fans are still waiting for their first? Help me make bigger and better videos by supporting me on Patreon. It's $1 forever unless you willingly custom pledge more. And if you can't do that, then don't worry about it. The best thing you can do to help me is subscribe. That option's free, and you can always change your mind later.